Hi, I'm Paul George. This snippet is about value studies and value sketches and how to approach a complex composition and to simplify it. Okay, we're going to begin first with a value chart, which you all know, I'm sure. Just take a little totem pole of five values. This first value we're going to leave white, and that's going to be a highlight. And then we're going to have 3 values and work our way into an accent. Okay, so there's our first one. We'll leave that white, and we'll start with a little. Okay, so there's our first value. We'll move down to the second one, and we'll cover the whole remainder of the squares. Move to the third. And then finally the accent, which is very dark. Okay, so there you have your value chart. It's very important to, when you're approaching composition, to learn how to squint. And squinting minimizes color, it minimizes values, it combines it, so you're able to look out and see the big shapes. And that's what we want to do. That's what value sketches and value charts are about. So let's look at a composition and see where that goes. What we're going to do is take this composition. This is Eastern Point Light in Gloucester. And it's a very simple composition. It's a natural composition in the sense that we're looking up to it. So we don't have to worry too much about composition in this. It's already set for us. So let's take that and take this value chart and apply it to this. And this is the way you would approach any composition. So we do a little chart, a small version of this. We place our center of interest where we want to see this lighthouse. And this is a very quick sketch. This is not a drawing, so it's not something you want to spend a lot of time doing. This is something that works out pretty fast. Okay, and we can design these rocks to go up into there like a sort of a road. All right, so there's our quick sketch of Eastern Point Lighthouse. Now let's break this into 3 shapes. The first shape would be the sky. That's a negative shape, that's the background to it. Then you have the lighthouse itself, and then the ground. So there's our 3 shapes, and there's our composition laid out. Now let's take this value chart and apply it to that sketch to show how we're going to paint it, how we're going to approach it. First thing we want to look at is the direction of the light. The light's coming down, because remember, whenever you're painting, you're never really painting the lighthouse or any other subject. You're painting the light hitting the subject and how it affects it. That's really the beauty of it. That's what we want to show. So we look at this and we look at where the light is hitting, and in watercolor it's important because we want to save those shapes. You want to save those white shapes and how they work. They're very important because what they basically do is show us the path of light and how it affects our composition. We also have this dark bush in the front, which you can make a decision about whether you want it in there or not. So out of these 3 shapes, we look at our value chart and we say, okay, how do we apply this to that? We already allowed for the light, which are the highlights here. We may go back to that, but the first shape is everything else. Just like we did here, we put this value over everything. We'll do the same thing here. and put this first value over everything except the whites, which we will leave. Okay, so there's value 1. Now out of these 3 shapes, you should see clearly that the sky is our lightest value and our lightest shape. So we will then put one important fact that tells you, very important, that if the sky is the lightest shape, then everything else in this composition is darker than that sky. So we can cover everything else with our second value. And then our third value would be on the building itself, on the lighthouse, because it's actually backlit. And that does a lot to emphasize the light on the building and so forth. So, and we have a little bit of shadow coming off the lighthouse. Okay, and now we can make a choice about this if we want to put that. The bush is backlit as well, so there we have our 3 shapes and our 3 values, and we've taken this composition and simplified it easily into what we want to do as a painting. So what I'd like to do now is take this composition and do a monochromatic watercolor for you to show you the next step in this process to make it much more easy when you go to paint it. All right, this is step 3 in the value sketch. This is a monochromatic watercolor. So what we're doing now is we're taking the value sketch that I did and turning it into paint, just to give you an idea of how it works in watercolor, doing this value sketch system. Okay, so it's breaking your composition down into 3 shapes and doing it with watercolor. It's very easy. The only thing you want to remember in watercolor, again, we need to save the white of the paper. So that becomes very important to know where you're going with that, with those shapes. And what that will do for you is create this beautiful path of light going across. Okay, so we'll do this. I'm going to take ultramarine blue here, but you can use any color. And just like the value sketch, this is another way of approaching a painting. It's just a quick way to get an idea. Just like we did with the value sketch using the pencil, we will cover this with one layer. We'll cover everything but the white of the paper that we're going to save. So this emphasizes that light on the paper and the path of light going across. You can see how strong that is and how important it becomes. It's really what paintings are about. Paintings are always about the light hitting your subject and how it affects it. Okay, so that's our first wash, our first value. We left the white of the paper to show the light. Now we'll add the second wash. And if you remember, just like you did with the value sketch, we take this and we might add a little more pigment to it, a little more water, and then we cover everything else because we know that the sky is our lightest value. And as I said, what that tells you, something very important, is that if the sky is the lightest value, then everything else is darker than the sky. And that's an important little fact to remember, because it helps you in painting, it helps you approaching the subject. It makes you realize that you don't have to paint around a lot of different things because they're darker. Okay, there's our second wash done, and you can already see how strong these shapes become, because the strongest painting you'll ever do is one that is simplified into big shapes. You have this big shape of the lighthouse and land against the sky. Very strong composition. So we'll put in the third value now, which is going to be the building itself, and we'll just add a little more pigment to that, and we'll get this lighthouse in. Just one more value on that. And that's just going to be the building and the shadow that it casts. Okay. All right, so there you are. You have 3 values, 3 shapes, and essentially your composition is done, with the exception of these other, the accents and the highlights. And all they do is add a little more form to your painting. So let me put those in now, and we'll finish this up as a monochromatic study. All right, so there we have our 3 shapes, our 3 values. Remember, you can approach any composition this way. It's a simple way to do it, and obviously in reality, many subjects have many more than 3 shapes, but for the sake of simplification, for simplifying your composition, this is the best way to do it. And you can take anything, a very complex composition, and make it very easy to work with. So I'm just going to add the accents now, which would be these small, the small things. They're actually very small shapes that will help to form much more of the painting. And that's simply just looking at it and deciding, what you want to do with it, which ones you want to emphasize it to make it work a little better. And if you wanted to put this bush in, this would be the best way to do it, to take a look at it this way and to see whether or not it works. You may decide after you put it in that you don't want it in there, so you don't have to put it into your painting. But that's the way you would approach it, and that would cast a shadow down in here, and then you'd have the rocks going up. So essentially that's all it is. So it's very simple. If we could take a second here and just look to review this. Again, this is how we began with the value chart. We took the value chart and applied it to our composition, broke the composition into 3 shapes, and then added the highlights and the accents to it to emphasize it. We took the same thing, made this monochromatic painting sketch from it to simplify this down. So the next step would be taking this and applying it to a full painting, a complete painting. So if you look, you will see on Art Class 1, 2, 3 that there are some full demonstrations, and there is one of Eastern Point Lighthouse that I did. I'd like to have you see that and see where it goes into the next step. So thank you very much for tuning in today, and please come back.